Hello and welcome to another episode of the SEO Unplugged podcast. I'm your host, Itamar Blauer. Today I'm joined with Dan Petrovic, who's the managing director at DEJAN. Dan, good to see you. How's it going?
Hello, thank you for having me, Itamar.
Pleasure. All right. So I think this is one of the more highly or higher anticipated types of conversations that we're going to be having today, all about AI search. And I really thought to myself, okay, what better person to talk about this topic, which is, some may argue is relatively new, others may argue that this stuff has sort of been around, but now we're really sort of seeing what will be most likely the mainstream type of landscape within the digital marketing sphere, especially when it comes to search. So, to kick us all off, why don't we talk about what AI search actually is and what it actually does? Because I think this is where it's quite contentious depending on who you speak to. There's lots of sources and information out there, and people have varying levels of opinion. So, what's your sort of take from an introductory perspective in terms of what AI search actually is and what it does?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought the fact that this is something that's been coming a long time, and it's been given to us in small increments, and it's been evolving and evolving. And those of us who've been monitoring and keeping up with the developments from BERT onwards, we knew that Google is an AI-first company, or back then we referred to it as machine learning, deep learning, and so on. Now people just wave word AI without much consideration for the mechanics behind it. So it's become this all-encompassing word. And the problem is, if you don't take the time to understand the history of it and the background and the underlying framework, you run a risk of sort of thinking of it as this mythical, mysterious thing, where in fact we have more visibility into the engine that runs Google systems than ever before. How nice it is to be able to ask Gemini, why did you show that result? Why not my website? And it tells you. I mean, it's like a dream come true for an SEO. It's absolutely amazing. So what is AI search? I think what people refer to as like AI search, like AI mode and AI overviews and so on, that's basically just a presentation layer on top of what's been around for quite a while. So you've got your search results, and they get plugged into a model. Model sees a whole list. We can go into the details of that, but in a nutshell, organic search gets presented to a model, and then model tells you what's in there instead of you looking at SERPs. That's probably the simplest way to explain it on top level. Now, arguably, you could present AI assistance as a form of search, where you don't get the typical results because effectively it's gone bi-directional. So search has gone AI and AI has gone search. We no longer chat to models unplugged into the web. Models are now mostly plugged in, and they make choices when to call up on search as the resource. And they do it very often. We know that. So whichever way you spin it, like it's the coin with same side. There's no difference. You've got an AI agent and you've got a search layer. So all the work that we do as SEOs brings the results to the AI. So we've got just that filter in between the search results and the end user, and that's what's different. Small little addition is the agentic features, meaning the AI has a light decisive power now. It can decide what to include, what not to include. So there's a little bit of filtering and decision making, but it's not what it will be in 5 years from now.
Okay. And yeah, and I think we'll be getting to the nitty-gritty for sure. And I think just to sort of keep the theme and start it off light, because a lot of people, like I sort of said, is they will be hearing different things from different people. And in this sort of age of the internet, it does become quite dangerous sometimes, depending on the types of sources that you sort of read, and then how it can shape your view on certain topics. And the question from maybe about the particular contrast between traditional SEO and what AI search is, a lot of people may see it in terms of certain pipelines. So, for example, with traditional, let's say, Google search and SEO focused in a traditional sense, you would have your crawling, your rendering, your indexing, your ranking. Are there particular pipelines that sort of differentiate the traditional side with what we're seeing now on the sort of AI SEO or AI search scene?
Majority, more than 90% is identical. So all that stuff, crawling, rendering, indexing, ranking, it's all the same.
Hmm.
We're literally getting Bing index, Google index, whatever index supplied to a model, and model then does stuff with that. So none of that is different. With little exceptions like the deal that OpenAI in particular has been making with various content suppliers, plugging in external data sources. So we have to differentiate search from other data sources because there are other data sources, and we call this RAG, retrieval augmented generation. And effectively, you can think of it as the data source plugged into a model, and model sees that on demand when it's useful for it. So sometimes it'll be seeing stock market information. Sometimes it'll be seeing maps, data, or information about books or proprietary data feed from certain publications like magazines and so on. So these can come direct. They don't have to come from search. They still come from search, but it's an internal form of search from their own indexes. But a part of that RAG stack is Google search and is Bing search and a variety of other search engines that contribute to that.
I'm glad that you brought up RAG. I mean, I always called it RAG, but RAG, yeah, however you want to say it. But that's
Give
sort of
GIF.
like, yeah, it depends, right? Whatever you want. But this RAG, right? This is a technique within grounding, and grounding has been brought up a lot recently in terms of like how essentially these platforms can pick and maybe try its best to verify or to ground what it's saying based on actual information. So could you elaborate a bit on sort of like how that you mentioned the RAG and what that is, but within grounding as a whole, that's a very sort of hot topic at the moment from what I'm sort of hearing. Could you explain a bit about what that actually is?
Yeah. So imagine a complex query entering a model. Um, User is looking for information. They're going to a trip to Sydney. They're traveling from LA. They've got a spouse, two children. One of the kids has hay fever. The other one is lactose intolerant. They would like to rent a car. So this is not like a simple single search query. It's a multi-dimensional, multifaceted requirement. People are now used to that type of interaction, thanks to ChatGPT as the pioneer of the method. And so you type in something like that into Google, and obviously the model has the capacity to answer certain queries straight from its memory. And that's because the model has a worldview built from its pre-training through post-training, reinforcement learning, all the layers of training that go in to the model. And effectively, we have a library of knowledge stored in the model in form of weights and biases. People call them neurons. It's essentially a layered network of things that fire up as input comes in and output comes out. So the problem with the internal worldview of the models is that model training is very expensive and it takes a long time. So you can't update your model every day. It would be trillions of dollars in costs every year. So you have to train the model to a certain level where it's competent enough, where it knows enough to get by with tools. And that's where that need for grounding comes in. there are basic forms of grounding that are implicit, and the model doesn't have any choice in it. So when you send that large prompt about traveling to Sydney, so the model is presented with that prompt as text. But also, behind that, there's small little elements of metadata that grounds the model with current date, user location, the device they're on, and so on and so on. The leader in this type of personalization, of course, is Google. OpenAI has some metadata added, but Google already has an enormous stack available to them, and they know these types of things. Just imagine search history and all sorts of things that they can tap into. Now, once we go past that basic level model grounding, we go down to a bit more nitty gritty stuff. So the model takes the query in, but the query in the background, this is outside the model's control, and this is a little bit of a nuanced thing that a lot of people don't quite understand. So there's a classifier in the background that decides whether the query needs the grounding or not. It's like, what can Gemini just decide that? Yes, it can. Gemini is expensive to run. Can GPT decide? Yeah, they can, but they don't. They use a tiny little model classifier that just decides binary, yes, no. Of course, the yes and no are probabilities. So yes could be like 60% yes. No could be 75% no. So it's a range of probabilities. But what happens is there's a classifier in the background that determines, does this need breaking down? And if it does, then the prompt gets broken down into tiny little queries. And these are queries that we're used to as SEOs, like normal search queries. And then if that's within Google, Google then Googles itself, runs, say, 6 different queries in the background. They run in parallel, and they accumulate an enormous amount of results. So Google's model, Gemini, doesn't see that at all. So that doesn't get to grounding. So there's another system in place that filters most of it out. So they go top K of the best results, and they filter by certain criteria and basically prepare the best of the results, and then they give that to the model. But they don't get the snippets. So the grounding process doesn't contain your typical title and the little short snippet. It's more of an expanded snippet, almost like different chunks of the page stitched together, literally stitched together. They're divided by little dot, dot, dot ellipses. As if somebody went through your page, considered the query, and went, okay, for that query, I'm going to take this, 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 and that chunk of the page, and I'll create a snippet that's relevant to that fan out query. So I just dropped a new term for some who don't know. Fan out query is the query that's generated from the original prompt to break it down into multiple facets to allow for the creation of those background Google searches. So now all this complex process takes place in the background. We've got, I suppose we should call them extended chunks or extended snippets. They get supplied to the model as grounding context, together with the metadata, the user's location and device and date, the system prompt, the original prompt of the user, the search queries, and the grounding chunks for each citation. And citations are, we refer to as the URLs that were selected to be the grounding URLs to support a certain statement within the generative response. So what happens next? Once grounded in real-world knowledge, the prompt and the metadata and the system prompt, the model then synthesizes the answer and attaches the citation from each grounding source to a segment of its response. And that completes the grounding process for Google, and very similar process takes place within OpenAI system.
Hmm. And so when you sort of mentioned grounding in terms of the frequency of when it occurs, so from Google systems, it may be a lot more prominent for queries as opposed to other AI platforms like ChatGPT, for example. But I suppose that it's sort of a two-parter type question where, first of all, there are some queries I would assume that you don't need grounding. For example, if you ask, "Is the sky blue?" There's no real, is it for queries that may require a lot more context that does require the additional information? So is it correct in saying that, okay, not every query necessarily, or not every prompt necessarily needs grounding, but then on the flip side, in terms of what it is at the moment, if ChatGPT, for example, doesn't ground as much as, let's say, Google and with Gemini and its AI sort of software or power, then is that something that into the future there's going to be more prominence of grounding as a default? Is it to do with just the costs? Is it to do with the processing, or is it to do with the technology? Where do you sort of see grounding in the future in terms of like a default state of prompting or searches? And I would imagine that it will be more prominent the more complex a prompt or query is, because then you're adding other types of facets and context within a particular prompt that has to generate that. So, what's your sort of take on that?
Yeah. So early on, I can't remember. This would have been a couple of years ago. I worked directly with Google's Gemini API, and I extracted perhaps 100,000 queries, and I would observe when they're grounded or not. May have been a million. I don't know. It was a lot of data. So what I did is then I created a training data set based on that, because I had the exact ratios and percentages of how often Google grounds a query. And it was a really diverse range of queries. And I think I even used organic queries from my client Search Console to see which ones would be grounded and which ones wouldn't. And this is through Gemini API. And so I basically put 0 if it wasn't grounded and 1 in the spreadsheet after the query to denote that it was grounded in that situation. So what I did then is I trained a deep learning model, Microsoft's the Beta v3, and I created a classifier that can predict any new queries that I throw at it, whether it'll be grounded or not. So that was my first grounding classifier, and I can thank Mike King for giving it a cool name. Query deserves grounding, QDG. I mean, it's such a perfect continuation to query deserves freshness. I just adopted that and then went with it. So that was for Google, and then I created a separate one for OpenAI. And OpenAI had a significantly lower ratio of grounding, but it was still grounding. But then when AI mode was launched, I realized that Google grounds 100% of everything. Is the sky blue? Grounded. Is water wet? Grounded. What's Google? Grounded. So it's really quite fascinating. I guess it's their infra. Doesn't cost them anything. I mean, costs energy and bandwidth and whatever. It's all cheap. And I think Google has a level of PTSD once they started experimenting with, what was it called? SG? I keep forgetting. Yeah, eating rocks and doing crazy things with glue, and like people making fun of them. I was actually encouraging Google, go experiment. Make mistakes. It's fine. Just go, advance. Because back then they were still quite conservative as a company. They were activated by OpenAI, but not a same sort of fire that they're on now. Properly activated like a startup. So what do we have now? We have a situation when AI mode grounds everything, 100% ratio. If you're in chat sessions with Gemini, of course, it'll ground only things that it needs to ground. So still, but OpenAI's models will not ground as much. Neither mode, whatever mode you're in, it's still going to be quite sparing, and that's because it costs them money to ground things. they don't have a search engine. Google does, so they have to buy API and access. They have to scrape. God knows what else they're doing. There's evidence that OpenAI has been working with a third-party data provider, most likely a scraper. We've seen some pretty convincing evidence that scraped content has been entering OpenAI. People seeing weird stuff in their search consoles, which wouldn't have happened if they used the grounding API directly with Google. So yeah, that's behavioral differences between Google systems, most notably OpenAI. AI mode and Gemini, and OpenAI has a very, very conservative ratio of grounding. So yeah, by the way, the two models that I trained, they're up on Hugging Face. Anyone can use them, build their own tools with it. But there's also a little demos that I uploaded, QDG, and I think it was grounding.dejan.ai. You can chuck a query in there, hit submit, and it'll tell you whether it be grounded or not. I sometimes use them. It's like a really good quick check for something.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that I kind of wonder with the reasoning, and the reasoning makes sense behind why OpenAI might not be grounding nearly as much as Google from a cost perspective. But from an answer perspective, could you make the argument that AI mode results are going to be, on the whole, more accurate than anything that you might prompt
No,
into ChatGPT? You can't say that.
no, no. The AI mode has a problem of being this, I don't know, savant child. It's so intelligent. It's like, it knows all this stuff and it can synthesize information. It's fast, but then so naive and so gullible. The worst thing, like I sometimes ask like a really deep question, and I get like a technical thing, and as soon as I see like search engine land and various like Ahrefs and random SEO blogs, and I'm like, no, just exclude all SEO content and give me academic sources and this and that. It'll basically take anything that's written and it sounds vaguely convincing, and it'll take it face value. That's why listicles work at the moment.
Hmm.
I'm so ashamed to say that I just put mine up last week.
Terrible.
Um, yeah. So for those who are not familiar, I mean, like I'm guessing there'll be a variety of audience watching this. Listicle is when you create a list of, well, not like the manipulation tactic is you create a list of the best of whoever, whatever companies that do this, this, and that, and then you place yourself at the top of the list, and then or whatever in the middle, and then you include some people who really deserve to be there. And AI is so naive right now that they just go ahead and do that. So like you'll start seeing random people in those lists.
I'm shocked that you were sort of insinuating that you don't deserve to be on those lists. But
It's in poor taste placing yourself on such a list. I think, but it took me a long time. So, but what started happening is that I was forced to put one up to combat the, I suppose, misinformation that's circulating, like in Australian search results. So I decided I morally justified my actions by saying it's shame on Google, not on me, that I have
yeah,
to do
I
this.
don't hate the player, hate the game. But so this is quite interesting then. So if we're saying that just because a query or a prompt is grounded doesn't necessarily mean that the actual information that you're going to get is more accurate than having a response from a type of prompt that hasn't gone through that grounding process. I think that's quite an important distinction because I think generally speaking, people will make the assumption that if a prompt is grounded, it means that it's more likely verifiable through stuff that exists already that's outside the realms of any training of that particular model. So I think it's a really important point that you made there, not to assume that the results are going to be more accurate in a system that grounds everything like AI mode, because it still is, like you're mentioning, will take the bait, let's call it, in terms of what is sort of working, and you can call it manipulation, however you want to describe it. But now I want to sort of understand then from these AI systems, how do they actually pick which URLs to reference or cite, or what types of brands? How does that process sort of work? Does that sort of feed into the stuff that you were saying before about grounding process, or the pre-training, post-training, reinforcement, all of that sort of? How do these systems really know what URLs to pick out, what to actually cite?
Yeah, an active area of research for me. And doing some pretty exciting work around that. I've got some cautiously optimistic about understanding the whole thing. It's very complex. Um, so it separates. We cannot, when it comes to AI search, we cannot generalize because we have distinct separate systems. But I'm going to say two different providers at the moment. There are smaller ones like Perplexity, but like I'm going to focus on Google and OpenAI as major players. And they've got different software choices that they're making. So that the way that they process information, that the way they provide context, the way they're grounding, everything is similar but different. So we can't generalize. For example, when it comes to Google's grounding process, the selection of URLs for grounding is abstracted away from the model, and the model has no say. The model gets the final list of grounding sources, and it is compelled to use every single one of them to integrate into the content, to the point where Gemini sometimes attaches 2 grounding sources to a single paragraph, or 3, or I've seen 4 on occasion. And that's why we get such a high ratio of grounding sources for Gemini responses when we compare to GPT. So GPT. So there's another thing worth mentioning is that in Google systems we also get confidence scores for grounding. No longer available with Gemini 3. It's not available in Gemini 2.5. Still lingering about in the API calls for Gemini 2.0. And this is the, I guess, vestigial feature coming from Vertex and the corporate search. When you build your own search systems within, so that kind of translates. It's a really valuable source of data for me and my team. We're collecting it quite aggressively. We spent thousands of dollars collecting that data because it's about to go. Once they phase out Gemini 2, it's all gone. But I have enough to train a model on it to provide confidence scores on the grounding URL with respect to the grounding prompt, with respect to the entity that I use to generate that prompt. Because in my process, I start with entities that are of relevance for a client. Let's say a client does credit cards, so that's an entity that breaks down into multiple different products. And then we build synthetic prompts that we then use to probe the models to get the citations. And when when the API returns the citations, we get the confidence scores. We don't have the fan-out queries in the background. We don't have the good ones, but we can synthesize those because we have a query fan-out model now, which works really well. So over to OpenAI. OpenAI doesn't include everything that it's presented with. So they presented with, say, 100, I'm going to just make up a number, 100 URLs, and they pick out 12 or 26 to include for grounding. And this process of selection is a little bit mysterious because I can actually see, and this is really interesting, you can actually see what's been selected and what's been rejected. We get that information. So all the tools that I build, the citation mining tools that we have and analyze the OpenAI grounding stuff, I have the winners and losers. So I could technically train a deep learning model to predict when a URL will be selected and when not. Heuristically, mechanically, I can't interpret the data. I'm looking at it and it's like, why? I don't understand. And first, you're probably thinking right now, oh, it's probably the authority, if it's like Wikipedia or like CNN, it'll be grounded. But for some unknown blog, it won't be. But it's not. I'm seeing authoritative websites in the refusal list. And so naively, I try to chat to the model. I say, "What? Why?" I pretend that basically I create a synthetic situation. So I say, "Okay, well, this was the prompt. This is the response you gave me. It didn't, but I say it did. These were all the grounding candidates you rejected, and these were the grounding candidates that you accepted. Why these? Why not the others?" And this is, I guess, qualitative research. You can't make. First of all, you don't trust the model anything it says because it can hallucinate. You ask it 3 times same thing, it'll give you 3 different answers. And that's the best way to test to see if the model is lying to you. It's like people are like, oh, you can just create fan out queries by prompting Gemini. No, you can't, because like you keep refreshing, it'll keep giving you the same thing. It doesn't actually know what queries it got. You can get it from API. You can't get it from the model directly because it's abstracted away from it. So running theory for me right now is that it'll reject an authoritative source like CNN if it's already satisfied. Like it's already got a high confidence grounding source for that paragraph, so there's no need to replicate. That sits well with me, that theory, and I think it's intuitively sound. But I don't have any proof for this. I don't know what's going on. Why do they reject so many?
So and I think this will probably be one of the more maybe controversial things that we can talk about at the moment, because of naturally with this new environment, you're seeing a lot of opportunity for people to try and figure out exactly sort of how you're describing, why are certain types of results included or excluded, certain sites, why certain URLs or certain parts of different types of pages. Now let's talk a bit about prompt tracking. Because from what you're saying, where you can search for the same things, hit refresh, and you get different results that show up, how does this sort of lend itself to tracking prompts to see where you're being cited, where you're being visible, and being able to try and track that every day, for example? And lots of businesses at this moment in time are looking for such a solution to understand how is AI perceiving their brand, what's their share of voice across AI searches, and all of this sort of stuff. But given that you can get different results to show if for example, 2 people search for the same thing, they can be in the same location or even on the same type of device, they can still get different results. So how does that sort of lend itself with the concept of prompt tracking, and what's your take on it?
Absolute waste of time. Absolute, like a work slop, busy work that means nothing to anyone. Um, I do prompt analysis on the analysis stage, and I do a lot of prompting. I'm talking thousands of different prompts to get the data that I need. Daily prompting, weekly prompting, monthly prompting of the same set of prompts, arbitrarily entered, pretending that that means anything. I don't subscribe to that school of thought. That's silly. What I do instead is I do distillation of models' perceptions towards brand and its attitudes towards the brand. You can consider it model survey. So I asked the model, let's say I have a client, and I enter the brand of the client. I say, name the top 10 things that come to mind when you think of this brand. And I register those top 10 things that it gives me. It's a JSON output structured as 1, 2, 3 through to 10. So I have a ranking system that sorts the entities relevant to my client's brand in the order of probabilistic output of the model, with full understanding that this could shuffle. So I track this weekly, and results are mostly varying until like a big moment when the model updates and things really shuffle properly. So initially I could, on the initial analysis level, I could do like same prompt and I repeat it 100 times. And at 100, I come up with the statistical sample, or 1,000. Prompting is cheap, especially where you don't allow the model to spew tokens at you. You give model exactly 10 outputs allowed in a JSON structured output. So then I measure the deltas between the ranking of certain concepts, and I mention the frequency with which that concept has appeared in the list of top 10. So that gives me two metrics. One is the frequency of appearance, and one is the ranking on when it does appear in the frequency. Different scales. One is always 1 to 10. So your average position will be between 1 and 10. The other one goes to infinity effectively. So what I do is I normalize both to scale of 0 to 1, and I multiply them, and I use the product of the two as the AI visibility score for my clients. And this is repeated over and over again. And I have two modes of tracking this. One is with grounding and one is without grounding. Grounding measures the impact of traditional SEO on AI. The other one measures the model's perception, innate primary bias of the model towards my client and how they consider them relevant to other entities. So that's one direction. That's a brand towards entities. Then I flip that around, and it's a bidirectional probing approach. So I go from the entities that I specify that are important to the client, and then I go, okay, entity, name 10 brands relevant to this thing, and then it lists 10 brands. Sometimes my client's in there, sometimes not. Sometimes on a high position, sometimes on low. But I do the same methodology of tracking. So what are we doing here? We are actually preventing model from being verbose. We're distilling to the very core of what it needs to say, because it ends up being the same thing. Whether you produce a massive prompt output and then use natural language processing to condense that, or whether you ask the model to give it to you straight away, big difference. I think what's happening right now with all these people prompt tracking is that they're polluting earth and burning forests just to get to the nugget of information they could have gotten in the first place. So that's the first layer of insight in the visibility when it comes to. So yeah, I wipe off the idea of tracking some random arbitrary prompts. But the next level of research is understanding the confidence levels at a bit more granular level. So what I do is for each entity that I've specified, then I ask binary questions. And this is even worse in terms of restriction. So the model can say a single token as output. I ask the following question: if my client brand was in the grounding results for this entity, for this product service, would you recommend this website? Yes? No? And it can only say yes or no. If it says yes, I take the probabilities for the yes. If it says no, I ignore that and I look at yes to see what percentage it was going to be if it was to say yes. We can do that because models work by sampling from all the probabilities of tokens that they can take from. Think of it as a cup that they can take words from, whatever the next thing that they're going to say. And they can pick various tokens out of that. So in this case, the most probable two tokens are yes and no. So even if the model says no, I still have the yes in the cup, and I can take it, look at it, and say, okay, the probability for this token to be said, returned by the model was 16%. I go, okay, write it down. That's useful knowledge. And then I build graphs for my clients, and I present that as a dashboard. And I say, for these entities that you care about, the probabilities of you being recommended as a result after being presented to the model is such and such. Then I repeat the same exercise for competitors. I build a competitive matrix, and I understand who's strong and who's not. And I reverse that. I go from brand to through all the entities would you recommend, and I ask separately in the separate API calls. And the output token output is 1. And so I flip that on the other side, and I say, we're done with the brands, and we ask each brand for entity, and then we go for each entity, would you recommend this brand? And we ask the same thing and come up with the answers again. So that gives us the confidence scores and effectively AI relevance scores. And this is not grounding. This is primary bias. We're probing the model's primary bias towards or against a brand with respect relative to the entity that we care about. Next level of research is going down to token probabilities in a sentence completion when we ask the model to say something. And we look at high probability tokens, low probability tokens, and how they branch and what sort of tree structures they make in the probability space of all the things that the model wanted to say but it couldn't. We allow the model to walk all the paths in the probability tree that it could have said. We call the tool Tree Walker for that reason, treewalker.ai. And you basically put your brand in there, and we ask, what's this brand about without grounding? And we ask the same question with grounding. We ask the model to self-evaluate, give it a score. 3 separate API calls. And then we allow for probability walk, and we allow for token sampling. We present that to the user, and we try to form a hypothesis. What are the weak spots? What are the high entropy spots where the model flip-flopped? It said credit cards, but it wanted to say home loans at the same time. And what do we do with that? Those are the items that you need to bolster in. Now we're finally getting full circle citation mining. We're going down to the level of citation mining and understanding. That's when I use the full prompts. So I basically take all those same entities, consistent behavior, right? The same entities that I was using for tracking visibility, for prompting AI relevance, same entities I enter into my system, which uses those entities to create an arbitrary number of prompts stemming out of those entities. So prompts credit cards, okay, give me 10 prompts for that. And it just gives me random synthetic prompts for credit cards. And so once all the prompts, let's say we have 1,000 prompts generated, then I do citation mining. So for each prompt, I can say, for each one of these 1,000 prompts, give me 10 rounds of prompting for it, just so I can sample it a bit more than just once. So I end up with 10,000 operations, and I end up with 100,000 citations from Google and say 10, 20,000 citations from OpenAI. Selected, not selected URLs from OpenAI, grounding scores from Google. I can see which chunks were supported by what URL. I go and scrape the sources. So for each grounding source, I go scrape the page to see how relevant it is to the query. What was it about that? So the missing link that I don't have. Remember how we're talking about how Google structures and assembles the extended grounding snippets that are not quite the full page, but not quite the SERP snippet. Those little modules. That's the active area research, and I'm trying to figure out how can I replicate those so I can create the synthetic versions and do more rapid testing of the model selection rate process. Selection rate is a thing that I'm busy with right now because it's the new thing that is like successor of CTR optimization. So now it's the selection rate because models don't click, they select. So my business, I'm in the business of selection rate optimization for my clients now. Yeah, so it's quite a complex system, but I hope you're able to visualize and follow through the whole process.
Yeah, and I think and this is why it's also important. I'm glad you sort of took the time to talk about these different areas, because I think it's an important educational piece for people to sort of see the complexities of these systems, and that it's not just, for example, what the user sees is always going to be the most sort of the lowest common sort of denominator, most basic fundamental thing a user will do. Will put a prompt in and get some results. But it's when you understand the different complexities and the processes and the systems behind that, which all of these play a part in terms of that final output, and that's why I'm sort of glad that you went through these different areas. And something that a lot of people are going to want to know is, what signals at the moment are currently influencing AI or AI systems to be in those answers. So, and I mentioned sort of signals specifically because I don't really think it's worth calling these things ranking factors anymore, because it's not really ranking, right? So like, what types of signals are you finding at the moment that are great in influencing these answers? I know you mentioned listicles before. Maybe that is the main thing at the moment, and that's just how the world is. But what have you sort of seen recently?
Listicles don't really influence the models all that much. They're just for search. That's how you get into the model's context to start with, and then model just has no choice, has to do something with it. But in terms of what I consider to be the main, let's call them ranking factors. So what? Main ranking factors in AI. Actually, I should call it maybe selection rate, because model doesn't necessarily rank stuff. It gets ranked results and they are supplied to it. So model's selection rate and selection behavior from the choices it has for grounding is determined by brand and relevance to the query. Those are like common sense stuff, but ultimately boils down to those primary biases that I've been measuring early in the process. So, and that comes down to training data. Does the model already recognize you as an entity associated with that concept or not? And that's the whole point. The reason I'm mining model sentiment in the initial stage is to get the attitudes towards or against the brand for a certain thing. And often, like I was just working on a proposal for somebody who wants better AI visibility, and I typed in their domain in one of my tools, and the model thought that they were like a collaboration place for software developers and this and that, like a car wash business. Because the name was completely the name of the business wasn't revealing. It wasn't obvious. It could have been anything. And the model took a guess, hallucinated, and so that's your main ranking factor, I suppose. Say the model sees something in the grounding choices that it's familiar with already. It goes, "Oh, I know that," and puts it in. And a model sees something, it's like, I don't remember seeing that before, so I'm not gonna put it in. So I've done, I don't know how many grounding supports I've analyzed, not personally, but through my machine learning workflows, maybe 1 million or 2 or 10, I don't know. It spent maybe $20,000 on it. So that's a lot of grounding stuff that I've gone through. And I kept seeing the models, like association with models' initial thoughts when you switch off the internet and ask the model, not the internet, the switch off the grounding and you ask the model. It's very highly correlated with how it makes the choices when the results are supplied. The one thing to remember is in AI mode, everything that gets to the model in the end, the model uses. So the selection rate is 100%. That process of filtering is abstracted away from us and we can't get to it. I would love to get my hands on that data. And so how is it, what does Google see before filtering? What are the results? And the surviving results that get to the model, what sort of filtering process happens in the background? Obviously, we understand it's relevant. It's relative to the query, which is relative to the prompt. So we've got prompt, query, the pool of all the grounding candidates, and then a small subset of selected ones. But in Google's ecosystem, we don't get to see that. It's really frustrating. We could scrape. So technically, we could we could synthesize grounding queries or extract them via API call from Gemini, run the searches separately, and synthesize the results, and then see how many of those were actually found in the API call that we did test for, and then do the diff. Basically, okay, these are the survivors, these are the losers, but it will be quite a guess. I mean, it wouldn't be the exact situation.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I wonder then, for the first part of what you were mentioning around the example of the prospect that you had, and or you were sort of looking for what the sort of model determined that type of brand to be, or what entities are related, and they're actually sort of like car wash company. And so this is that one of the sort of, because you've got loads of different tools, is that something that people can go ahead and sort of check for themselves with a
Yeah.
tool that you've built? What would be the best way for them to do that?
There's a stack of tools that I mentioned. So I'd probably just go to my tool section on the website. So dejan.ai, DEJAN.ai/tool. You'll see about 20 tools on there. So look out for Tree Walker. Tree Walker will allow you to do the token explorations to see where you're weak. So the low confidence tokens for when model thinks about you. And then also, there's also another one called AI relevance, where you can enter your brand or your website and a certain concept that you care about, and it'll tell you how likely it is to be recommended. So that's that binary thing that I was talking about, yes or no. So it'll tell you how likely the model is to recommend you if you were one of the grounding results. So that's another one. If you're a bit more like, if you're keen on setting up and measuring visibility and all that, there's a free tool, AI called AI Rank. That one's a bit separate from all the other tools. There's literally login in the menu navigation of website. It's quite popular. I need to look at upgrading the server. I just made it for myself, and then like anyone wants to test it. Now I have like 5,000 users on it. I don't know, like I'm not even a developer, but like it's really being popular and used because that's that bidirectional probing and rank tracking. So I have a secret tab on that, like a limited feature, because like it's becoming too complex. That tests that binary probabilities and looks at the competitive matrix and all that. So if somebody's like really keen to like dive into it, they can reach out to me. I can just switch that feature on for you. Query fan out tool is there. You can enter your prompt and it'll I think that's just queryfanout.ai. Yeah, you can just enter your prompt. It'll give you the list of the queries that it would break down for. So that one's coming directly out of Gemini 3.0. Just upgraded that yesterday from the old model. I don't know if I forgot any other tools that we brought up. Oh yeah, query deserves grounding. So there's a QDG classifier in there for both Google and OpenAI. I don't know why you would use Google one. I guess it's useful to see it in the context of Gemini, maybe when you're chatting to Gemini app. Just with the understanding of like, if you're in AI mode, don't bother. Everything's grounded.
Sure. And then obviously there are lots of different tools that you've sort of kindly provided to in the public domain. Um, I want to know from your perspective on the sort of overarching theme of what we're talking about today. What should SEOs do right now, like right this minute? What is it that you want people to go and do in sort of the context of AI search?
I think get a bit of education on the underlying technologies, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And it feels really liberating to understand these things. And I didn't go to any like university degrees. I didn't do a course. I wasn't listening to somebody's podcast. I just rolled up my sleeves. It's like, okay, I have this problem. I need to understand this. And I was just talking to it, the AI, about all the things I wanted to learn. How does this work? How does this work? I keep asking how, but how, but how? Okay, let's do this script. I start minimum viable product type level script, and then I expand outward and outward and outward. Then you need to know when to stop vibe coding, because you can create a mess and lots of useless, pointless things. But now is the time to because we're still all exploring and experimenting, and nobody's figured it out. Like, we've got some pretty good ideas. You've seen frameworks on my end already developed and processes, but with all honesty, it's just tests. Good hypotheses being tested. We say that to our clients. We're figuring this out. AI search is not a solved problem. I haven't got 20 case studies where I've got 100% increase in traffic or 1,000 increase in traffic. I've seen case studies floating around. I don't believe any one of them. So honesty, this is a new industry. We're pioneering. We're working on it. Take the time, learn about machine learning, learn about how models work. Once you know the background, it kind of reminds me of when in high school I missed out on some maths classes and I couldn't follow the rest. And that made it worse. And then I got to uni and I just I did not know math anymore because I just fell out of it. Don't be in that position that you romanticize what AI is, or treat it as this mythical thing. Those days are gone. You know how Google was the closed box, and we were just praying to God's Google and trying to figure out the algorithms. Now you're the player. You can literally participate. We can do vector searches. We can build our own search engines. We can understand all these systems and how they work, and the information is so accessible. So I know that not everyone has the time and the luxury of it, but whatever time you find, try to learn something every day in the next 12 months, because you'll be so grateful that you did if you start learning now. So basically machine learning concepts and how models work and operate. Maybe you can start with simple things. What are model hyperparameters, and how tweaking them impacts the output? Understanding top K and the temperature and all these things around sampling and token probabilities, and then you can get into things like what are the tokens, and what are the tokens IDs, and how do tokens IDs get converted into vectors? How do vectors pass through model architecture, and how do they get spat out? What does it all mean? It's not just academic abstract stuff. There's actually a lot of good stuff in there, because the attention patterns that happen within the layers of the model are how the model perceives a page of text. When somebody looks at a page of your content, their eyes will dart about that page, and they'll look for things like bullet points and bolded items. They'll look for models do the same thing. They get attracted to certain section of the content and certain syntactical structures, and it's all because of the attention mechanism within the transformer architecture. There's a lot to be explored and exploited in that area. So it's quite lucrative, and I encourage everyone to get started, learn a lot.
Amazing. Yeah. And I think this is, at least to be an SEO right now, I think is probably the most exciting time in at least recent history, right? In terms of the things that are available now and the way that technology is evolving, and it kind of like everyone feels like a little kid again when you're kind of like you've got these new toys and you're like, I need to try and figure out how the hell to play this game, and then also seeing the patches, so new things being added and different evolutions over time, and the models get improved and improved, and who knows where we're going to be in the next few years. Do you have any predictions of sort of where
Yeah,
this landscape is going?
yeah, absolutely. It's, it's on that blog post I wrote in 2013. We're still on track with all those predictions. Um, so I love to brag about that one. It was so correct. It was to the year. So I said in 2023 we'll chat to Google. But then I didn't finish there. I said Google will be agentic in nature. We'll send it to do things for us, and it'll come back like a shopping assistant and representative and so on. So in the next 5 years, we'll see the rise of agentic web, where things will happen in the background a lot, and we'll see the relevance of traditional surfaces where we interact with information becoming less important. We saw the writing on the wall when Google came out with the voice search through their assistants, OK Google, and that sort of stuff. That's ancient tech now, but they're being refurbished now for Gemini to be installed inside. So what's going to happen now is like, okay, going to your website is not going to be the main thing anymore. Like that surface is now optional. So not just the device, it's the actual software part of it. So your website as an interface will be maybe just a data feed for an agent to get the information to the AI model, who will then filter, digest, and present the information to the user. So there's a lot to worry about there. Will your content be presented appropriately? Because you've got a mediator between what you wanted to say and what is said. So a lot of the commerce will start happening in the background. I'll have the need. Let's say you have a cat, and you need cat food. So you GPT it, and Google it, and it just starts happening. It starts getting this. There's a guy at your door delivering it every week. You didn't do much. Your credit card's in file. My agent talks to their agent, and they sort it all out. My agent finds the best price and that sort of stuff. So there's going to be a lot of API-driven commerce, a lot of background stuff. We've got interesting players currently happening. So Google and Cloudflare. There are protocols in place, agent-to-agent protocol, agent-to-payment protocols. Things are happening, and it's all background stuff. And so people arriving to your website will be just like an optional thing. Really, really fascinating things that are happening now, like really cutting edge ephemeral interfaces. Like Google's AI in 5 years' time will spin up a temporary interface for you to do the thing that you need to do, and it'll never appear again. It'll have the buttons and things and slider, and it'll be able to conjure up an interface for you on demand for the task that you need to solve, and it'll vanish. And when you need something else, it'll do that again. So our interaction surfaces will be transient, ephemeral, and temporary. We might start seeing styles, kind of like what we did with Material. When I think it was Google that launched Material, wasn't it? Like the style, and like when we take certain things for granted on an Android phone. You pull a screen, nothing happens, but the screen just elastic a little bit down. Something tells you that things are active. So that'll be styles and paradigms like that. But surfaces will start to be optional and temporary. So that's pretty exciting stuff. And we'll have a lot more agent-to-agent interactions rather than humans having to do the drudgery. I look forward to it. There'll be a lot of mistakes and a lot of risks associated. But one thing I do know is that people are lazy. It's just how we are, like food wasn't always available. And so it was a survival thing to be sparing of your energy. So of course we are like that the way we are. It's our nature. So I guess if somebody's presented with a wall of text, it's like, oh, do I read that, or do I just get my AI to summarize it for me? Same thing with shopping, same thing. So we are willing to sacrifice quality and maybe pay a little bit extra money if we don't have to do the work.
Yeah, for convenience. But I guess then the underlying aspect from an SEO perspective is our job still going to be relevant at that point? Which I would say the answer is yes. What do you think? Is SEO still going to be relevant at that point where going to websites is optional, but like at least from my perspective, there still needs to be a level of understanding that you have to sort of contextually be able to provide, or what these systems already know about you from like their training data and things like
Of
that.
course. Yeah. Look, I love sci-fi, and I grew up on it, and I always thought that we're gonna, like 2000 something, we're gonna meet aliens or alien intelligence. Never once it crossed my mind that the first alien intelligence that we meet will be the one that we create ourselves. And so that's what we optimize for now. there's a new intelligence that we have to optimize for in addition to humans. So we just got our market just got bigger. Our targets got bigger, so we have to influence the machines in addition to humans now. That's pretty exciting. Like I said, we're figuring it out. Looks like we've got some pretty good ideas on how to do that. It's pretty naive right now. So it's like this is the meta tags and exact match anchor text era. So when did I start in SEO? Like would have been 2000, 2001. Feels like that now. It's easy to manipulate. It's so gullible. It's not always going to be like that. And we're going to get from this weak intelligence to very sharp, strong intelligence. You're not going to be able to fool it anymore. But there's always going to be selection criteria and biases, and you want your clients' products to be seen as more favorable than everyone else's.
For sure. Well, still an exciting time as it will be even in as we head into the future, where I mean it's great to get your predictions on it as well. Last thing that I'll check before we wrap up is where can people find you if they've got questions, which I imagine if you've been listening up until this point, there may be a question or two that you've got for Dan. So where can people sort of reach out to you if they'd like to ask any further questions?
Yeah, you can. I'm most active on LinkedIn and Twitter. So you can just ping me, message me on either of those two. If you have a business problem, then book an appointment on my website,
Amazing.
DEJAN.ai.
Dejan.ai, DEJAN.ai. And yeah, with that, Dan, really appreciate your time. This is so far, at least, the longest episode that we've had on the podcast, but there was so much to discuss, and I'm really grateful for your time and explaining everything. And to everyone who's been listening at home or wherever you are, thank you as always, and we'll see you in the next episode.